Morning everyone, it's Katrina from the Alluring Bead Boutique, and today we're going to do a little small project that will help us understand the thread path and structure of tubular square stitch. And also in this video I'm going to show you how to do an increase and a decrease while using tubular square stitch to make this cute little component right here. The materials I'm using today are some 8/0 Silverline Permanent Finish Peridot Opal round seed beads by Toho. And I'm using some 11/0 Toho seed beads also, and these are the Silverlined Milky Grapefruit. If you'll notice here that I used black beading thread because I was taking photos of, thought about doing this as a written tutorial. And then I changed my mind and decided I'd do a video tutorial. But I kind of like the way that line of black thread looks on this project. So I'm going to go ahead and continue to use that. If you don't like that, you can switch over to white thread. But after looking at it for a little while, I came up with the idea of maybe adding a black or a jet opaque crystal to one end and making a set of earrings or something like that out of these components. So let's go ahead and get started. I'll be using a regular old size 10 beading needle, and this is some 0.008 wildfire beading thread. Because I'm using these 8/0s and I'm not really going through them too many times, this thicker thread works out just fine. For this project I'm not going to use a stop bead, but you can use one if you have trouble keeping your tension. Normally, if we were working on flat square stitch, we would need a stop bead, because in square stitch, you pick up all the beads of your first row at the very beginning before you start bead weaving. But since we're working in a round with tubular square stitch, we won't necessarily need a stop bead here to hold our beads on our thread. I've been working on a lot of different tutorials for square stitch lately as I work through my Bead Weaving 101 series on the AlluringBeadBoutique.com. That is my, as those of you might know, but that is my website that my blog, A Jeweler's Life, is located on. And there are lots and lots of tutorials over there, and not necessarily everything has a video here on YouTube. So if you're looking to expand your skills in bead weaving, it's a great resource for you would be to head over there to the AlluringBeadBoutique.com and check out Bead Weaving 101. So to get started, the first thing we're going to do is pick up our row 1 beads. And for row 1, what I've done is I've picked up an 8/0 and an 11/0 3 different times. We're going to make a 3-sided tubular structure today, and instead of the normal four-sided ones. That's why we're only picking up 3 segments of our 8/0 and 11/0. I'm going to carry that down and leave a little bit of tail thread there. I'm going to pass through all of my beads again to form a round, just like this. Make sure you hold on to your tail thread so that you don't accidentally pull the working thread all the way through your beads. If you are going to tie a knot, you won't need much of a thread here. I don't usually tie a knot. I leave just enough to rethread and work off this tail thread later. I don't like having a knot on the end of a tubular structure because it's very visible on when you're trying to use these components for a project. So instead, what I do, instead of tying 2 overhand knots here, I'm just going to go ahead and pass through this next the very first 8/0 C bead that I picked up to close the beadwork into the full round, like this right here. And then also, because I am not using a stop bead, at this point I could add a stop bead here and carry it down to the beadwork. And what that would do would be to help me keep my tension as I work through the project. Or you can simply pass through all of the beads one more time to secure your working thread. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to just take my needle and work all the way back around this circle one more time and make sure I don't skip any beads along the way. And I'll know when I've worked all the way back around that I made the complete circuit, because my tail thread and my working thread will be exiting the same bead once again, just like that. And so now you'll notice that the working thread is really secure in there and it doesn't shift around as you work. So for this project, we're only going to be using square stitch along our larger 8/0 beads. And we're going to be using the tubular form, obviously. So what we're going to do, we're exiting from an 8/0, and that's where we want to start each row, is out of an 8/0. We're going to pick up another 8/0 bead, and we're going to pass back through this when we're exiting from the opposite side. Here's where I'm exiting. My working thread is here on the right, say. So I'm going to come back through that bead left to right, just like this. And pull. Get my tail thread out of the way. And that's going to bring this bead snug up against the bead on the base, just like this. I'll come out just a little. Like this. Then I'm going to pass through the next 11/0 in the very next 8/0 on the base ring. I'm going to do another square stitch. I'm going to pick up an 8/0 because I'm currently exiting my 8/0. I am going to come back through the 8/0 from the opposite side. So my working thread once again is on the right. I come through the bead from left to right. And I pull that bead into position. And this is what you want it to look like. You want this bead to sit in a line going outwards this way from the base row bead. Pass through the next 11/0 and 8/0 on the base. So each round will have 3 square stitches on the 8/0s from the previous round. Now we're exiting the third 8/0. The thread is exiting to the right, picking up my 8/0 and going from left to right through the base bead. Oops, dropped my needle. Position my bead. Then I'm going to come through the next 11/0 and 8/0 on the base. I'm not going to step up right here because if I do, that's going to leave a loose gap on my thread from that bead I just added. So I'm going to move over one 11/0 and one 8/0 before I step up. And that's going to secure this last bead added much more securely and not allow the thread to get loose or the tension to come off. Then I'm going to step up into the 8/0 on the row I just added. So my working thread is coming out this 8/0 to the right. I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to go through the bead above it from right to left. So we have to reverse direction to step up, just like that. Now we're going to connect all of those square stitch beads we added in this round. Now you can see that I have stepped up into the row I just created. Now I'm going to pick up an 11/0 and I'm going to sew an 11/0 in between each one of these beads, these 8/0 beads, so that the second row looks just like the first row. So let's go ahead and pick up an 11/0 and sew through the next 8/0 that we added in row 2. Pick up an 11/0, sew through the next 8/0 of row 2. Pick up one more 11/0 and sew through the next 8/0. Sew through an 11/0. So first through the 8/0, then the next 11/0, and the next 8/0. So sew through 3 beads there. And as you pull that into position, now you can snug your work up into a nice tubular shape. Just pull along the same thread path, just like that. Now we have 2 rows. So we are going to go ahead and repeat the steps for this same row. I have 3 rows here using 1 seed bead. So we're going to copy that. The first thing we do is do our square stitch. We're exiting the 8/0. If you'll notice that now I'm sewing in the opposite direction because when we stepped up, we reversed direction. So now my working thread is exiting to the left. I'm picking up an 8/0. I come through the 8/0 on the base, the same one I'm exiting, from right to left. Then I'm going to position that bead before I move forward. Go through the next 11/0 and 8/0 on your base. and add your next 8/0 bead. Pick up your bead and come through the bead you're exiting from the opposite side. Position your bead so that it sits properly, just like that, and then move into the last bead, the last 8/0. So pass through an 11 and an 8. All right, so now we're going to add our last little 8/0 seed bead here. We're going to pick up our 8/0 and pass back through the 8/0 we're exiting from the opposite side. Then we're going to position our bead, but before we step up, we're going to move through the 11/0 and the 8/0. So when you're moving through that 8/0, you're going to make sure you're going through the 1 on the second row. Then we'll step up into the 8/0 here on the third row that we just added. And as we do this step up, you'll notice we're shifting direction again. So now I'm going to come back through the third row bead from left to right. And I'll be sewing back to the right one more time. Now I'm going to pick up my 11/0 seed bead, sew through the next 8/0 on row 3. And just repeat that all the way around by picking up an 11, sewing through my 8/0 on row 3. One more to go. Going to pick up my 11/0, sew through my next 8/0. And while I'm at it, I'm going to go through the 11/0 and 8/0 on the other side, just like that, to secure my thread and close the round completely. So now I have these cute little 3 rows of tubular square stitch with 1 accent bead in between my 3 8/0s. I'm going to show you guys how to do a little increase here. We're going to step it up to 2 beads in between our rows. We're still going to just use our 1 8/0 for our square stitch. Now my thread is exiting to the right again, so I'm picking up that 8/0, and then I'm going through that bead I'm exiting from left to right. I'm going to move through the 11/0 into my next 8/0 seed bead. I am going to pick up an 8/0, square stitch it on top of the bead I'm currently exiting. Then I'm going to move into my third 8/0 here. I'm going to add my last bead. And this time when I square stitch through from left to right, I'm going to go ahead and pass through that 11/0 seed bead and save myself a little bit of time. Because remember, before I step up, I'm moving to this next 8/0 here. You know, coming in through the one that's on row 3, not this new one of row 4 we're working on, but the one below it. Then I'm stepping up into the row 4 bead right here. And to do this little increase, all we're going to do is pick up 2 of our 11/0s in between each bead. So I'm picking up 2 11/0s. Coming through my next 8/0 on row 4, 2 11/0s, the next 8/0, and 2 more 11/0s. And I'm going to come through the next 8/0, the next 2 11/0s, and the next 8/0 to close the beadwork and secure my thread. So now we've done this cute little increase. In the next round, we're going to step it up to 3 seed beads in between. So let's just go ahead and work it. We're coming out of our 8/0, so we know it's time to add an 8/0 using square stitch. We're going to sew through the 2 seed beads, 2 11/0s, and the 8/0. We're going to add our next 8/0 bead. We're going to come through 2 11/0s and the next 8/0 so we can add our last seed bead. And if you'll notice how much smoother my stitches are going now that I've got a little bit of a base that I can hold on to. And that last 8-0 in row 5 here. Before I step up, I'm going to come through the 2 11-0s in the next 8-0. Then I'm going to step up by passing back through that bead above the bead I'm exiting. And then this time we're just going to pick up 3 seed beads in between each 8-0. So let's go ahead and pick up 3 11-0s. And so through the next 8-0 of row 5. Pick up 3 more. So through that next one. And pick up the last 3. And this time we're going to sew through the next 8-0, the 3 11-0s, and the next 8-0. So like that. So we're sewing through those 5 beads right there. And we're going to take a look and shape our beadwork if we need to. Make sure everything stays in this cute little triangular round like that. So now we're ready to do row 6, and we're just going to continue on putting our 8-0s where they go on each row. So I'm coming out of that 8-0, so I'm adding 1 for row 6. I'm going to move through all 3 of those 11-0s in between and then go into the next 8-0. Add that bead. This time when I add my bead, I'm also going to work myself through those 3 seed beads. You can take shortcuts here and there. Just make sure that this bead you're adding stays positioned correctly before you add the next bead. Because when you square stitch, you're kind of like locking that thread because you're looping around. So you want to make sure your tension is good and that your beads are positioned nicely before you add another square stitch bead. All right. So I'm going to push on through those next 3 seed beads in the very first or the very next 8-0 on row 5. Here's my row 6 bead. This is my row 5 bead. Then I'm going to step up. Now to finish row 6, I made a little tiny adjustment. I picked up 1 11-0, 1 8-0, and 1 11-0. And what this did is it gave me a tiny little increase from the row beneath it. But it also had this cute little dot of accent color right there. And I really like the way that it came out looking. So I'm going to go ahead and repeat that. So I'm going to pick up an 11, an 8, and 11. And I'm going to sew through my next row 6 8-0 right here. And I'm just going to repeat that 2 more times. 11-0, 8-0, 11-0. Come through your next row 6 bead. And then one last time. And when I pass through my next 8-0, I am going to go through. Here's my 3 beads I'm adding. I'm going through the next 8-0, and then I'm going through that first segment I put on, 11-0, 8, 11, and the very next 8-0. I'm going to pull it all into a nice little circle. And as I play with the thread, I'm just going to make sure everything looks nice and that all of my beads are lining up really nice along the beadwork like that. So now that we have this, these little segments with the 11-0, 8-0, 11-0 as our accent beads, we could potentially really increase this beadwork. Now we could we could square stitch an 8-0 bead to every single one of these 6 8-0s here, and that would increase the size of our tube continuing forward. But since I'm only working on a component, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start decreasing back down so that I end up with the same amount of rows. This will be my center row of my component, the one we just added with the 8-0 accent. Now we're going to work our way back down so that we have a mirror image on the opposite side here. So basically you're just going to reverse everything we just did. Where you want to make sure that you're exiting an 8-0 that is on this line of 8-0s here. You don't want to be exiting one of your accent beads. So once you're in the proper position, go ahead and start your next row, which is going to be, I think, row 7. And we're going to square stitch our next 8 onto a row 6 bead below, just like we've been doing. Then we're going to make sure you pass through all of the accent beads and the next 8 that's on the base. Check for your position here to make sure you're coming out of a bead that follows this line. And then add your next one. Sew through your next set of all 3 accent beads and go into that next 8 bead here on the base. And then add the last 8 bead. And I'm just going to go ahead and sew through the bead I'm exiting, the 3 accent beads, and the very next seed bead, the 8 seed bead, from row 6. Here's my row 7 bead poking up all by itself. So I want to go into that one below, into row 6. And then I'm going to pull everything together. And now I can step up into this bead right here. So I've worked this thread down pretty short. And I'm going to go ahead and weave this thread off and add a new thread. So I'm currently exiting this 8 seed bead on row 6. The easiest way for me to weave this thread off, I'm exiting to the right side of that bead. I'm going to come through the bead below it from right to left. I'm going to sew back through the bead above it from left to right to lock that thread one time. And I'm going to come back through that bead below it from right to left. Then I'm just going to move down a couple of beads. So I'm exiting to the left. I'll go through the bead below that from left to right. Now I'm going to go through the next bead below from right to left. And don't pull too tight because you don't want to pull your little line of beadwork out of whack. You want everything to still keep a nice tubular shape. And then you can either lock your thread a couple more times. So now I'm coming out of this bead to the left. I'm going to go back through that bead above it if I can get myself enough room. From left to right. Then I'm going to come back through that same bead from right to left. And then I'm just going to carry on till I get to the bottom row. So I've locked that thread in twice along the way. And as I come through this bead below, it's a funny thing, but I'm coming out right where my tail thread is. Just like that. So now I could even tie a knot right there if I want to. Actually, no, I'm not. My tail thread's over here. So if I wanted to, I could pass through that 11 and tie a knot right here. But I don't like the knot, so I'm just going to pull my needle off of that thread. And I'm going to thread on another small length of thread so we can finish up. And I'll show you how to weave that in. Now, sometimes when you're adding an ending thread in certain types of stitches, you would really need to remember like where you last left off. But because we completed that round of adding these square stitch beads, it didn't really matter because once we get back up to the top, we know that we need to be coming out of one of our base beads of row 6, an 8, so that we can step up into the row 7 that we just completed. So what we're going to do, and you don't have to start all the way down at the bottom. You can start anywhere you want. I'm going to start about 3 beads back right here. And I am going to take my needle and I'm going to go through one of my 8 beads. And I just happen to be going left to right because I'm left-handed. When I pull this through, I'm going to leave myself just a little bit of a tail, just enough to hold on to so I don't pull it all the way through. I'm going to go into the bead above it, back in the opposite direction, just like we did when we were weaving off. I'm going to come through that bead above from right to left, holding onto my tail thread. Then I'm going to come back, right back through that same bead I started from, left to right, and I'm going to lock that thread somewhat in place. Now, it's not going to be locked completely because it's right here, you know, at the end of our thread. If I pull really hard, I can pull it up and shorten it. If you watch. If I pull hard, see how it's shortening? So what I'm going to do is I am going to pass through those 2 seed beads right next to where my thread's exiting. And I'm going to come into this next row of 8 beads. I'm going to go through that 8. And I'm still going left to right because that's the position I started in. Now I'm going to lock through this 8 above it. So I'm going to go back right to left through the one above it. And then I'm going to come back down through this one below it, left to right one more time. That's really going to secure my thread a lot better. Like that. So now I pull, I can't move this thread. It won't shorten. It's not getting shorter. It's locked. So now I can continue on. I'm just going to go through and do that one more time to the next set of beads. So I'm going to come through the 2 accent beads in the middle first, so I don't have exposed thread. And I'm going to come into this 8 on the next row over, or the next column over, I should say. And I'm going to go back through the bead above it, just the 8, not the 11, from right to left. And then I'm going to lock my thread one more time. I'm going to come through the one below it, left to right. And so now my thread is like super duper secure and I don't have to worry about it. Now I'm going to move up to the top. So I'm going to come up back through that bead above it in the opposite direction, right to left. And then I'm going to go into the bead above that from left to right, because now my thread's on the working thread's on the left. And now I can step right up into this row 7 8 seed bead. I'm going to step up into it. And now I'm going to reduce back down to 3 seed beads in between these row 7 8. So I'm going to pick up my 3 11. Sew through my next one. Make sure your threads don't get caught from where you added thread or your tail threads. And pick up 3 more. Come through the next one. And pick up the last 3. And once again, I'm going to go through that next 8 just like I normally would to close this up. But then I'm going to just move ahead through the next 3 seed beads, 11 and the next 8 just to give myself a little bit better tension. And so there you can see, now we're working our way back down. All right, so now we're ready to add our next round of 8 for row 8. So we're exiting an 8, we're picking up an 8 and going back through from the opposite side. Back to square stitch. We're going to move through our 3 accent beads and go into our next 8. Go ahead and stitch that bead on. And I'm just going to go ahead and move through my accent beads and move into my final 8 at the same time. Before I add that last bead, I'm going to make sure that these beads line up and look nice. And I'm going to do the same thing on this stitch. I'm going to pick up my bead. I'm going to go through the bead I'm exiting from the opposite side. I'm moving through those 3 11 and moving into that next 8 on row 7, not the new bead, but the one below. And when I pull, you'll notice that bead pops into position really nice. And now I can step up. So I'm just going to come back through that row 8 bead from right to left. And we're going to continue on decreasing by picking up 2 seed beads and placing them in between each of our beads that we added in row 8. Pick up 2, pass through the next 8, and then pick up 2 more. We're going to come through the 8, the next 2 11, and the next 8 to really close our work. Then we're going to wiggle around and pull our beads into a nice little tubular shape, so everything looks pretty. And then, as you guessed, we're going to continue decreasing, and on the next 3 rows, we're only going to add the 1 seed bead in between our 8 after we step up to close the beadwork. So let's go ahead and do one more row, and then I'll show you guys this one last time. So we're going to add our square stitch bead. We're exiting an 8-0, we pick up one, we come back through from the opposite side. We're going to play with that bead until it does what we want it to do, which is sit nice on top of the previous one. We're going to go through the 2 accent beads and go into our next 8-0. Pick up your 8, sew back through the one you're exiting from the opposite side. And if you can, go ahead and come through the next 2 11-0s and go into your final 8-0. Position that bead before you add this last one. Adding the last bead, and I'm going to go ahead and sew through the 8-0 I'm exiting from the opposite side, the 2 11-0 seed beads, and then the next 8-0, which is still on my previous row, not this new one I added. So you're going to sew down through the one below the one that's on top, and pull it. And now we can step back up in the opposite direction into the new bead above. And go, this time we're going to go back down. We're picking up 1 seed bead in between each of our 8-0s. Make sure you're sewing your 1 seed bead into the new 8-0s that you added in this last row. And if you want to secure that thread real good, as you sew through the last one, push through the first 11-0 and then the very next 8-0. And pull into a nice little tubular shape. And you're ready to do 2 more rows just like that. So go ahead and do those last 2 rows, and I'll meet you back. Now, just finish adding my last 11-0 seed bead. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sew around my circle a couple of times to secure my working thread. And to ensure that I have a pretty finish here on this end of my tube, so just like I do on this end of the tube, just like that. It's really raining hard here today, so my lights are acting just a little bit funny, but anyhow, so that's all there is to doing this cute little increase and decrease in some tubular square stitch. We've learned how to add an end thread. To get rid of this thread, all I would do is repeat the process of the exact same way I ended the other thread off before I added some new thread. You know, just weaving down, weaving down. You could also tie some half-hitch knots right here along the top edge of this tubular shape. So my working thread is exiting right here on the right-hand side of that 8-0. I'll just take my needle and go under that thread in between the 11 and the 8. Pull nice and slow till I form this little loop. Then I would just take my needle and go through the loop, and then make sure my knot falls to the right-hand side of that 8-0 and the left-hand side of that 11-0 right there. You could do that a couple of times and then cut your thread. Make sure you move away from the last knot that you make before you end that thread with the scissors or a thread burner. So there's 2. And I got to move away from my knot. So I'm going to have to come through that 11-0 right here and then the next 8-0. And now I can safely cut my thread. And so here are my finished earrings. If you'd like to see how I finished them off, just head over to the post up here on the information or down in the description box below, and that will take you straight over there and show you how to finish off your earrings exactly like I did mine. Alright guys, so that is it for today. I hope you've enjoyed learning how to do tubular square stitch, also how to do an increase and a decrease, and how to add an end thread in a tubular square stitch project. Alright guys, thanks for watching. Have a beautiful day. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel.